benefit from it if you hung through this video this long. Okay, and I'm going to go right to where I see that crease, pivot, come right over to that stitch, right there, up, trim these guys up. See, just cut your threads now and they're done, and then you get really fast at it too. Alright, get this out of here. I'm going to get rid of all that bulk on that corner and a little bit on that corner. Come back over here and trim this guy up. Get a little rid of that. Clean my machine. Alright. And what I'm going to definitely do after this is go over to the iron and give these a really good press. I want them to be nice and sharp edges. Okay. And keep it right side up. That's going to go up and that'll come down. This one, because I sewed that a little bit longer, it's going to hang over this stitch line a little bit, and that's a good thing when we're trying to do the stitch in the ditch sample. So I head to the iron and give these a good press, and I'll start a new video on how to close all these holes up. All right, way to hang in there. So I went to the iron and I pressed all of my little waistband samples, and you can see this is the side, the wrong side with the opening, and here is my right side. So I made sure I pressed where I was right against that seam, and that you know, nice and flat. There's no little lip going on there. All right, and now what I need to do is show you how to close them all up. So what I want you first to do is kind of look at all three of them. And you can see this one's sitting just kind of a hair above that stitch line. So that's going to be a perfect one to do with my needle and thread and doing a slip stitch that we learned earlier in the year. So I'm going to slide that one over there and put it away for a little bit. And we'll start with the ones with the machine. There we go. And then of these two, if you have one that's slightly longer than your stitch length, because we kind of intentionally tried to do that with one of them, such as this one, we're going to save that one for the stitch in the ditch, and then this other one is kind of lining right up to the stitch line, so we'll let that one be our top stitch. So top stitch, what is that? It is exactly like what you will see on a pair of jeans. You actually see the stitching. It's going to be up top, be visual. It needs to be nice and neat and straight. Stitch in the ditch, on the other hand, is something that kind of, if you're in a hurry, say, or you have a long distance to get around something and you want to have the look of a slip stitch, but without taking all the time to hand stitch. So it's kind of like the little cheat method to give you that look. And what it is you're literally stitching in this ditch between where the garment and the waistband are connected. So there's a little canal there. And you're going to try to stitch right in there. Now, I'm going to start with that one. What you need to know is we're using contrasting thread, so it is going to show. I will tell you that if you slip, or if you're going to have an error, try to error too far to the lower side of the waistband. If you come up onto the waistband, it's definitely way more visual. So you're going to go ahead and put your needle in, and I know you can't really see this, but my presser foot is not down yet. I've just hand rolled my needle till it pokes right into the fabric there, right where I want it to start. All right, then I'll lower my presser foot, do my back stitch. Oh, and I probably should tell you, as I put my pins in, I double check that on the back side you are catching that fabric. So let me just do that real quick. You want to make sure you're catching back here, because the whole point of it is to attach this facing this back side of the waistband down. So that right there, I'm barely. So you might have to just kind of force a little more fabric down there so that you can make sure that you are actually catching the waistband. Okay, so back to what I was doing is needle down. Yep, I'm going to start right there. Lower my presser foot. The trick I find is you just really have to kind of pull that waistband open so that you can kind of stitch right down in that ditch. And that way when it springs back over a little bit, it'll kind of cover your stitch. Again, not a time to go zipping super fast. Just take your time and try to hit right in the ditch. And stretch it out. My foot has like a little red line right down it, and I'm kind of just staring at the line. I'm actually staring a little bit at the needle. I know at the beginning we always say don't stare at the needle, but right now I want to make sure I'm hitting that needle right into the ditch, so just go nice and slow like that. And then back stitch at the end. It's a little thick down there, so when I went to back stitch it didn't want to move real easy, but all right. And I'm going to cut these threads nice and close again from the start. There and there. Ooh. All right, so let's take a look at that. Again, I realize most of the time you're going to go ahead and use matching thread, so beige on beige, and you wouldn't see hardly any of that, but heck, I'd be happy with that even with it being black. It almost just shadows it. So I'm super happy with how that turned out. So we've got a finished edge here, finished little tab it's called. Obviously the top of the folded waistband, this is nice and clean. In the back side here, you can see the stitch stayed pretty darn straight. Sometimes back here this gets a little bit different, which I am a tad bit there, pretty much because we're coming from like nothing to where it's pulled down a little further. But no, if you turn something like that, I'd be super happy with it. So picture on both sides of this when you submit this sample for me, please. And then you could see how this eventually would be like a hook and eye, or something would close that up at the other side. But that would be the finished side that you usually see on the outside of the garment. Occasionally you see them done that way. I don't know why that is. I think that's strange looking. Okay, so that was stitch in the ditch. Started with the hardest one. Now we're going to just do top stitch. The key here is to make sure as we're stitching we're grabbing back here, which if you're below the stitching seam here, you should be able to grab over there just fine. So on this one, you're going to want to find yourself a good guideline. This is one of those things I probably will move my needle over because I have that option, just so I can be stitching close to the edge. You don't need to be right on the edge, but like with a 1/4 inch, I'm sorry, about 1/8 of an inch away would be nice. Now on the end here, I can tell you right now, my foot does not want, fabric doesn't want to get underneath the foot right now because I rolled off that edge, so I just kind of helped it. You can put your needle down and just kind of lift, give it a little pull from behind and get it going. There you go. And now it's moving pretty good. But that thick area at the end, don't try to sew all the way to the end because it'll want to just jump right off of the fabric and then you can't get back onto it. That's no good. Just get yourself a good guideline. Again, I'm guiding with just like the inner edge of my presser foot. Same thing down here. It's going to be thick. It's not going to want to go backwards very good. It actually just wants to sit right on top of itself and take those stitches, which is fine. 3 little stitches on top of themselves is perfectly fine. Get that out. And voila. We now have a nice top stitch. Same thing. I'd be happy with that if it was turned in. This side all the way from the end all the way to there. I know in other classes I've had people start in weird spots, but when you do any type of top stitch, it should be a complete circle around. You don't want to randomly stop and start at weird points. So beginning to end from here to there. All right, like that one. Okay, and then our last one. Actually don't need to be at my machine, but my camera's set up, so I'm going to leave it there. So what you're going to have is just your needle and thread. All right, I tied my ends together at the end, so it's 2 thicknesses of thread. And this is the slip stitch that we did for the invisible hem. And what you want to first do is kind of open this up. Take your first stitch from inside here, coming out right along that fold. So it hides your knot. Your knot's going to be tucked way up in there. And then it's easier than the slip stitch we did before, because right now we're not only grabbing just a few fibers of thread, but we actually get to grab like a little chunk of the seam allowance there. So seam allowance is there, you grab a little chunk, you go right down into the fold of the waistband like so. And I don't know which angle is going to give you the best view, so I'll just kind of move around here. The thread comes out of the upper waistband over here, and then I go right below and grab a little chunk. It can be, you know, 1/8 of an inch. Go right back into the upper fold. All right, get that thread out of the way. Hopefully you guys can see under one of these lights here. So I grab a little chunk there, grab there. The camera does not have the best zoom feature, unfortunately. Keeping focus at the same time. And then another little chunk right back into the fold. And again, right where it comes out. So for this one, when you turn it in, it's going to be a tough one to grade on the camera. So I need you to take a good picture of the hand stitching that you do along here. Okay, and then a picture from the front side also. Because as I'm doing this, my finger's on the back side of the fabric, and I want to make sure I'm not poking all the way through. You do not want to see stitches on the right side of the garment. You have interfacing and 2 layers of seam allowance on the other side, so you should not be coming through and seeing anything on this side. And because we are grabbing the seam allowance, not below here, I don't want to see any stitches down here on the garment side either. That's not an attractive look. You want to keep these stitches happening right in the seam allowance and then right in the fold of the waistband. Again, right where that's coming out, grab a chunk of the seam allowance. And this one moves along fairly quickly. You can close these up. Not as fast as the machine, of course, but fairly fast. All right. And I probably will just give you one last glimpse of this at the end here. Or better yet, maybe I'll just do the fast forward feature. So maybe I'll do that. To bribe my son to come down and help me. Almost there. One stray thread. Okay, be careful of that right there. It likes to grab an extra thread and tuck them up, so make sure you have them all nice and straight. Before you start, if you put a couple pins in, it'll probably hold everything in place a little nicer. It's such a small distance that I chose not to do that. All right, and then as I get to the end down here, remember we're going to tie our knot. Just take 3 little stitches. I do have a little bit of seam hanging out here, so let me shove him back up inside there. Don't want that hanging out. So yeah, I'll get down here, pull that closed, pull that seam right back out. Get in there and stay. Just like so. One last stitch, and then 3 little stitches on top of each other. Just going to do them right at the end here. 1, 2, and 3. Even loop inside one of them there. And then I don't want to cut right next to there. I've got all this thickness and all this depth here, so I'm going to slide my needle up and out. Remember, we did this at the beginning, but we didn't have a lot of places to take it. Now you have all these layers, so with some tension, snip that thread, and now I've got a long knot that's hanging out up inside there. These odd little threads out of here. So super neat on this side. Don't see anything that's like super high end. I like to do like more of a couture finish, and then nothing showing on this side. Nothing below here. That would be your garment, and super clean. All right, that's awesome. 3 waistbands. 3 different finishes. You will have all these by the end. All right, good job.